Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. I'm thrilled to share with you my new book, City Tavern, The Founding Table. In fact, I just got the cover this week, so it's very timely. And we're going to talk a little bit about the significance of the City Tavern to the Revolution and just the whole time of independence in America. Just a little bit of background. You mentioned it in the beginning, but yes, I have four other books, and I'm a food writer, researcher, librarian, love food history. And my first book was Mrs. Goodfellow, The Story of America's First Cooking School. She was a cooking instructor in the early 1800s in Philadelphia. Really fascinating. We can thank her for a lot of things that we do now in the culinary world because she was a trailblazer. And that led me to find out about the $1,000 dinner, which was an 1851 culinary duel between New York and Philadelphia. And Philadelphia won, which is kind of fun because now New York kind of overshadows them. But it was a 17-course, 12-hour feast that
Whoa.
really kicked off dining in that whole Gilded Age time frame, and it led me down the path of really immersing myself in the Gilded Age in the 1900s, um, or that late 1800s, early 1900s time frame. So I wrote the Gilded Age cookbook. I had all these recipes that I was blogging about, so I put them in a cookbook, and then that led to the Gilded Age Christmas cookbook, which led me to this current book because, and I'll mention at the end, the last chef at the City Tavern, Walter Stabe, really wanted this book to be written, and he wrote my two forewords for the Gilded Age cookbook. So I have him to thank kind of for this idea. So let's get started on kind of setting the scene. So it was Saturday, March 22nd, 1834. Gale force winds whipped through Philadelphia's bustling waterfront. And at about 20 minutes before 4 p.m., a fiery blaze broke out in the building. And it was really fueled by those blustery conditions. For the City Tavern, which by that point was actually known as the Merchant's Coffee House, it was really the final act in the building's future as a vital meeting place for dining, commerce, and conversation. So if its walls could talk, it would have had many stories to tell, some of which I will share today and within the pages of this new book. So we have to talk about taverns a little, and colonial taverns from America's early years. They really were vital to the growth and function of communities. They served not only as rest stops and places to exchange horses, but also as popular gathering places for local residents. But it was really the urban places where their numbers were the largest. These big cities that were starting in America, they were centers of government and commerce. That's where the greatest concentration of retail establishments was, merchant trade, political discourse, and maritime activities. So this one here I have is the Penny Pot Tavern. That was a ferry terminal between Philadelphia and Burlington, New Jersey. There was a lot of commerce that went back and forth there. Now, perhaps the most elite Philadelphia tavern during the mid 18th century was the London Coffee House. That was established in 1754, and it was modeled after coffee houses that began popping up in London in the 17th century. It was more exclusive than other types of urban taverns, which served mainly the business community and upper classes. There were plenty of taverns by the waterfront where kind of the not so wealthy would go. Absolutely. Um, but it also did have a prime location near the Delaware River. As you needed to be near a water source for all kinds of maritime travel and commerce. And it was the first stop for many captains and travelers who used it to exchange messages and post and hold auctions. Now, here we go with the City Tavern. By the 1770s, the influential men in Philadelphia began to see the need for a new, even grander tavern that could provide even finer food and drink, overnight accommodations for visitors, and also a place for social, economic, and cultural activities such as assemblies and dances. That was becoming, very popular, and they wanted a big room where they could do that. In addition, political debate began to simmer within the colonies. So, as the colony's largest city and with its central location, Philadelphia was an ideal location for these colonial meetings. A new spacious location had to be found. So, what were they going to do? So, this group of men began planning this new large tavern as a business venture. And it was built via voluntary subscription, which meant that each group of investors would purchase 1 to 2 25-pound shares, giving them the right to vote on matters concerning tavern operations. So it's kind of like buying stock in a company, honestly. And the coffee house was a very similar venture. So an English immigrant named Daniel Smith was hired by the subscribers to operate the tavern in by late 1773. And his duties ranged from operating and maintaining the large property, which include not only the tavern, but the stables too, and supplying it with heat, clean rooms, linens, service, which included bookkeeping, personnel management, and scheduling. So he had a big, he bit off a lot there to chew. And he also had to select and purchase the proper wines, foods, furnishings, and know about cooking, bartending, and laundering. So there was so many things going on at the tavern at this time. Also, social events and club meetings. He was the scheduler for that, and he had to remain upbeat and charismatic. So very similar to a modern hotel. Now, City Tavern was an imposing structure. It was made from red brick. It had 5 floors with 2 public rooms on the ground floor, and one was on each side of the staircase. You would walk in, and the staircase was right there. It had a coffee room where customers could read both American and British magazines and newspapers. And then once you walked up that grand staircase, you were greeted with the building's highlight, which was called the Long Room. And that's where meetings, dinners, balls, and music concerts were often held. Extended the full width of the building. It was very elegantly appointed. And it was the only place that women were welcome at the City Tavern. And that was really just for dances and recitals. It wasn't like they were going there for dinner or to hang out or something. And then there were overnight accommodations on the 3rd floor. Now, just within just a few months of its opening, the City Tavern took center stage in the fight for American independence. Although it wasn't his most famous ride, on May 20th, 1774, Paul Revere came riding into Philadelphia to spread the news of the Boston Port Act. And that was the closing of the Boston port by the British government as the result of them dumping British tea into Boston Harbor by the Sons of Liberty, so the Boston Tea Party. And this was one of the first of many revolutionary rides he would take between 1773 and 1775. But he knew what his destination was in order to spread the news the quickest way possible. And that's he needed to get to the City Tavern. Now, within just a short time, and so it's evident, it was only open a couple months, the City Tavern was known as the most popular tavern in Philadelphia, the city's central meeting place for business news and discourse. And then the following evening, after his announcement, riding into Philadelphia, between 200 and 300 of the respectable inhabitants of the city of Philadelphia crowded into the City Tavern's Long Room to discuss Great Britain's actions and embark on a retaliatory plan. So the end result was the suggestion to form a Congress of Delegates from all the colonies to debate and form an aligned front to ensure the safety of the colonists. And within a few months, the Continental Congress began to materialize, and that really cemented the City Tavern as a key location in shaping the political future of the colonies. So by late summer 1774, delegates began to trickle into Philadelphia from all the surrounding colonies except for Georgia, who declined attending. And the City Tavern was a popular gathering place for them all. Many of these men were actually meeting each other for the first time, too. So this included John Adams and the other Massachusetts delegates, Sam Adams and Robert Treat Paine, who arrived in Philadelphia on Monday, August 29th, 1774. And you can read the quote there. That's right from his diary. And he talked about, meeting the men outside the city and just, going to the City Tavern and really loving it. So the City Tavern soon became the delegates' unofficial meeting place. They would make connections and forge alliances, solicit opinions, chew the fat, and offer thoughts and solutions. And all of this was over a pint of ale or a glass of Madeira. And as for a formal meeting place for Congress, two locations were under consideration. One was the Pennsylvania State House, which is now Independence Hall, and the newly completed Carpenter's Hall, which was actually closer to the City Tavern geographically. Carpenter's Hall was ultimately chosen, but it was a narrow decision apparently. Which note their meeting about it took place at the City Tavern on the morning of September 5th, 1774. Now, George Washington, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson all dined there frequently. It was really a way for the men to acquaint themselves with each other, learn about each other's passions, and share their thoughts for the future. Washington actually often spent evenings there as part of a club, they called it. So this was a group of men who dined together and split the check equally. So the meals were offered at a fixed price and eaten family style. So these large plates were brought out to the table and you would take what you wanted from them, passed around the table. Now, as per the eating and drinking bills paid to Daniel Smith and his successor, Guilford Daly, customers enjoyed things like venison dinners, shad dinners, chicken, duck, beef tongue, shoulder of veal, breast of mutton, loaves of bread and roast beef, accompanied by things such as mustard, olives, limes, vinegar, salt and pepper, and sugar. And then turtle soup, which I have here, was a Philadelphia favorite, with the city receiving shipments of green turtles from the Caribbean, sometimes up to 3 times a week. And all of this was washed down by copious amounts of porter, beer, Madeira, punch, spirits, and liquor. Now, on October 20th, Congress adopted the Continental Association and a petition to King George III calling for repeal of the Intolerable Acts. And so the delegates to celebrate this were celebrated in style where else? At the City Tavern that evening at a dinner given by the Pennsylvania Assembly. This included fine food and drink, followed by a grand ball, as documented by Washington in his diary, who noted, dined at the new tavern with the Pennsylvania Assembly and went to ball afterwards. So the City Tavern at this time was called by many things, which made it a little bit interesting in my research, because sometimes it was called the New Tavern, sometimes it was called Smith's Tavern, and then City Tavern. That's what they're all referring to, though. So it had several names. And then John Adams recorded how he dined with the whole Congress at the City Tavern at the invitation of the House of Representatives of the province of Pennsylvania. And then less than a week later, October 26, 1774, the First Continental Congress adjourned, and the delegates began preparations to return to their home colonies. But before departing, the entire Congress, along with some of Philadelphia's elite, who John Adams referred to as several gentlemen of the town, gathered for one final celebration at the City Tavern. So it was hugely important to these men. Now, once the delegates left Philadelphia and returned to their home colonies, the City Tavern continued to buzz with activity. And it was a popular gathering place for both Philadelphians and visitors with business, political, and social interest. But it was soon overshadowed by the brewing political troubles with Great Britain, which were far from over. So on April 24th, 1775, an express rider galloped into Philadelphia yet again and headed where else, to the City Tavern. So he wanted to see a representative of the Committee of Correspondence, and he delivered the urgent message that American and British forces had fought at Lexington and Concord. So by May, members of the Second Continental Congress began trickling back into Philadelphia. Now, these members continued to hold unofficial meetings at the City Tavern where they discussed business and political decisions while dining in one of the tavern's private rooms. So they often just had this whole room to themselves there and can talk and really hash things out the way they needed to. And George Washington patronized the tavern numerous times in early June until Congress unanimously elected him general and commander in chief of the colonies on June 15th, 1775. Now, on June 10th, the next year, 1776, Congress appointed a committee of 5 to draft the Declaration of Independence, and this included Jefferson, Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman. And most of the writing was done by Jefferson with some assistance from Adams and Franklin. And at the time, he was running a bedroom and parlor on the second floor of the Graff House, it was called. But when he needed to take a break from writing, he often walked the 6 blocks to the City Tavern, which he notes as dinner at Smith's in his personal book. And on July 2nd, the committee submitted it to Congress, where it was revised and finally adopted on July 4th, 1776. And the American colonists had officially declared their independence from Great Britain. But as we know, in order to fight it, in order to keep it, they had to fight and win a war. So as summer turned to fall, the hostilities escalated. Then came Washington's surprise attack on Trenton. December 25th, 1776, he loaded his troops, horses, and artillery, and led them across the choppy and frigid Delaware River. And fun fact, I live very, very close to Washington's Crossing, and they do the reenactment of it every year. It's a huge deal. But by the time the soldiers were across, it was 3 a.m., December 26th. As we know, they attacked the sleeping Hessian soldiers. And then on January 3rd, Washington's troops attacked the British in the garrisons near Princeton. Now, though Americans won the battle, it caused the British Army to retreat, but General Hugh Mercer was mortally wounded. The British who circled him thought that they had captured Washington and stabbed him repeatedly, and he lingered near death before finally dying 9 days later. And also, just because I'm from this area, there's a whole county in New Jersey where Princeton is, Mercer County, named after him. And for the longest time, they called it the Mercer Oak, which was the tree apparently under which he was stabbed. And it was there for years and years. I think lightning finally got it about 20 years ago. And then they put another tree in. Just a little fun fact for you. But anyway, he was given such a hero's funeral, but his body was taken to Philadelphia and then to the City Tavern. He laid in state in one of the upper rooms so that citizens could pay their respects to him. So that's how important the City Tavern really was to everything going on. And then on July 4th, 1777, Congress took the day off and gathered at the City Tavern to commemorate the first anniversary of American independence. And of course, it was a lavish banquet, where else, in the long room of the City Tavern. And this is the bill that Congress paid Daniel Smith for arranging all the details, which included fireworks. That was always a big deal, especially for the July 4th celebrations. And so you can see, how much that they paid him here. Now, on the morning of July 31st, 1777, Washington got news that the British fleet had been sighted off the shores of Delaware Bay. So by that evening, he and 8 of his military aides had actually set up a command center at the City Tavern. And he dined there that evening, and that's where he first met 19-year-old Marquis de Lafayette. and he had recently arrived from France and joined the American cause as a volunteer. And they hit it off and had a lifelong friendship and respect for each other. Now, Washington was able to stop the British from advancing, losing the Battle of Brandywine, September 11th. And then 3 weeks later, Cornwallis marched a group of British troops into Philadelphia and took possession of the city. So a lot of Patriot residents fled, including members of the Continental Congress. And then the British would occupy Philadelphia through June 1778. But the whole time, City Tavern kept operating as usual. Daniel Smith was now catering to British soldiers and Philadelphia Tories. So he saw he needed to keep his business going. It just was different people. So there were lavish dinners held there when the supplies were available. Still extravagant balls, the long room, especially on Thursday evenings. But soldiers began to get restless. So by the spring, Howe resigned his position and was replaced by Henry Clinton, who oversaw the British evacuation from the city. So the last British soldiers left Philadelphia on June 18th, 1778, and the Continental Congress returned in early July. So about 3,000 Tories were evacuated by ship, and that included the City Tavern manager, Daniel Smith. So there was a new set of changes for the City Tavern. So the British exited Philadelphia just in time for Congress to celebrate the second anniversary. So second year, their second July 4th. And once again, the delegates and a number of other influential gentlemen convened at the City Tavern in the afternoon of July 4th, and they had what they called a grand festival in observance of the special day. So apparently the large group was about 80 in total, occupied 4 tables, extending the whole length of the room, and just really had a great time there celebrating. Now, in December 1778, the General Assembly of the state of Pennsylvania had a dinner at the City Tavern to honor the election of Joseph Reed and George Bryan as president and vice president of the state of Pennsylvania. And this was the largest entertainment held to date there. Apparently 270 men were in attendance. An astonishing amount of liquor was consumed, as you can see here on this bill. So they had a new proprietor, Gifford Dally. You can see all the things here, and included like the breakage of glasses, plates, whatever. So they must have been having like a pretty ruckus time there in their celebrations. Now, later that month, Martha Washington traveled to Philadelphia to reunite with George. So on December 14th, a magnificent ball was given in her honor at the City Tavern. But not all the congressional delegates really approved of this event because of the wartime situation. And when General Washington arrived on December 22nd to Philadelphia, he also voiced a similar opinion. He needed the reprieve, but he expressed feeling displeased with all the celebrations and extravagance. His army and officers were suffering in various ways, lack of food, clothing, supplies, but yet these lavish dinners, balls, and concerts were held pretty much nightly in Philadelphia, and sometimes it could be 300 to 400 pounds per event. So he wasn't keen on that. And then this wartime economy, getting supplies and making sure you had all the provisions really continued to be a major focus for American businessmen and merchants who often met at the City Tavern to discuss strategies for getting runaway inflation under control and supporting the Army's efforts. So perhaps the most important and productive of these meetings was June 17th, 1780. A group of Philadelphia merchants gathered at the City Tavern to essentially form a private bank backed by their own funds to furnish provisions for the war. And they pledged 300,000 pounds, which Congress accepted. And within a few days, the Pennsylvania Bank was formed, essentially the first bank in North America. And actually, so this picture, the bank's in the middle. to the left of that is the City Tavern. It was right next door to each other, so you can see how close everything was. Now, this financial backing was a vital piece in the war effort, helping supply the Southern War campaign that really culminated in the siege of Yorktown in September and October 1781, and Cornwallis's surrender, essentially ending the war. So, on the eve of the siege, Washington arrived in Philadelphia to much fanfare, stopping at the City Tavern and visiting with several prominent gentlemen at an impromptu reception in the long room. So the City Tavern continued to remain a place to celebrate patriotism and unity, including a fete for George Washington on January 1st, 1782, given by the Society of the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick. It was also the site where the Pennsylvania State Society of the Cincinnati was founded on October 4th, 1783, by officers of the Continental Army and their French counterparts who had served together in the American Revolution. And at a meeting earlier that year, the society at large had elected George Washington as its president general, who would serve in that position until his death in 1799. So this Cincinnati room at the City Tavern was named after the Society of the Cincinnati. Now, in May 1787, the delegates returned to Philadelphia to work on drafting the U.S. Constitution. Although the City Tavern again became a hub, a center for club dining, it also received competition from the Indian Queen, shown here in this picture. It was a three-story brick structure just a block away from the State House. And just like the City Tavern, delegates had a hall or common room all to themselves where they could talk informally about convention issues that needed to be kept secret. Oops. Now, but regardless of the competition, the City Tavern was the chosen location to close out convention celebrations. So on Friday, September 14th, 1787, Washington wrote in his diary that he attended the convention during the day and then went to the City Tavern that evening to dine at an entertainment given on my account by the City Light Horse. So alongside the meal, the men consumed, as you can see here, another astonishing amount of food and drink: 54 bottles of Madeira, 60 of claret, and 50 of assorted old stock, just all kinds of things, potent punch. So they really did like their liquor there, and food and drink. Now, just 2 years later, Edward Moiston was made proprietor, and he made another big change, and that was turning the tavern's two front rooms into a merchant's coffee house and place of exchange, making the City Tavern the forerunner of the Baltimore, Philadelphia, Washington Stock Exchange. And on April 20th, 1789, Washington passed through Philadelphia on his way to New York City from Mount Vernon for his presidential inauguration, making his way down Market Street to the City Tavern, where the citizens had planned a grand banquet for him. And then on his September 1790 visit to Philadelphia, Washington secured lodgings for himself and his family at the City Tavern, since his preferred boarding house, which was called Mrs. House's, did not have the capacity for everyone in his party. So the City Tavern was able to supply the required number of rooms, as well as stables for 16 horses. And it was essentially the first visit of the U.S. president to Philadelphia, and the cause for great celebration. So, not missing out on a chance to honor Washington, the city provided a most superb entertainment for him and his party at the City Tavern. And you can see this is a newspaper article talking about it. Now, when Philadelphia was the nation's capital in the 1790s, City's Tavern still played a very prominent part, hosting a dinner to commemorate the anniversary of the alliance between France and the U.S. in 1793, and also honoring Alexander Hamilton to commemorate his retirement as first U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, and that was February 1795. But the City Tavern was starting to become less and less known for social events and dining. Again, as I mentioned, it was really kind of evolving into this merchant's coffee house and exchange place. So its main competition was Ollier's, which was a restaurant hotel, which played host to many grand entertainments. Now, by 1800, the City Tavern was functioning mainly, as I mentioned, as a merchant exchange, but it continued to stay vital by providing rooms for travelers and emphasizing its role as the city's central point in trade and commerce. So in 1808, the bar was moved upstairs to the long room, and the entire complex was renamed the Merchant's Coffee House. But when the fire broke out, the one I mentioned in the very beginning in 1834, on the City Tavern's roof and garret, it was destructive enough to force its tenants to evacuate while the fire and water damage was sorted out. And a new merchants exchange was actually already in the works. And since it was almost completed, the tenants were able to soon move into this new structure. And then this is the Merchants Exchange, still there today. It actually is owned by the National Park Service and houses a library, which is where I did a lot of this research. So it's right in that Independence Square area. Now, although these post-fire renovations were done fairly quickly, after 1834, the building really ceased to be this genteel tavern. The clientele were less of an elite class, um, more like vital tradespeople, aligning with the changing city. I mean, this was like, there were stagecoaches, then the railroad was coming in, there were faster ships. So everything was changing at the time. And the same went for the City Tavern. So its primary function was a place of commerce, serving as an auction store and providing room for businesses to rent. So you can see that here. It was like an auction house, really. Now, in 1847, the City Tavern and its surrounding buildings were sold to chemist Charles Lenning, and that really brought an end to the original City Tavern structure. In 1854, he announced that he would be demolishing the building in order to build a new four-story building for his business. So he did that, and for the next several decades, these new buildings served as stores, offices, and the site of the St. Albans Hotel, which you can kind of see on the left-hand side here. It says Shore Dinners, and then above that's the St. Albans Hotel. Then flash forward to 1948, the spirit of the City Tavern was resurrected when the site was recognized by Congress for its national significance. So over the next few decades, researchers and historians used images and documents to really authentically reconstruct the building in time for the bicentennial in 1976, and operated as a functioning 18th century tavern. So it was opened for the bicentennial. It had a restaurant. It was managed by a large food service company, but was really not much more than a concession stand. And you can see here, this is the reconstructed version of the City Tavern, which is still there. Now, in 1992, Chef Walter Stabe won congressional approval to operate the tavern, which reopened on July 4th, 1994, and it had an extensive menu featuring authentically recreated 18th century food and drink. And it was really a thriving business for over 26 years. I personally can attest to it. It was just an amazing place, and he is an amazing person, really. Locals, visitors, historians, and food enthusiasts all love the City Tavern to eat there. But when COVID hit in 2020, Chef Stabe was forced to close its doors, and it ended up being permanent. So today, it's currently closed, You can see the pictures here, and then behind me too, my background is the back of the City Tavern. Um, but the National Park Service is actively seeking commercial tenants to lease and operate it as a restaurant, but it really needs extensive maintenance, renovations to make it ADA compliant. And so visitors can once again enjoy an historic dining experience. But as you can see here, the exterior is still open to the public, including this back garden here. You can see that balcony. That's like when they were having these dances and other events in the long room. And you can imagine, especially if it's a warmer time, there was no air conditioning. You could go on that balcony and get some fresh air, and really take a break, a breather from. I'm sure it was getting pretty hot inside. Um, so visitors to the Independence National Historic Park can still walk around the building and see it from the outside in all its imposing red bricked glory, imagining all of those who once sought the refuge of a well-appointed tavern. And then this is the book. I just want to say thank you for having me. And so my publisher, which is West Home Publishing, said, this is a link to pre-order, and if you use that code, you get a 25% discount on it. My website and Instagram, Facebook, where I have a lot of my events listed and my other books and things, and just whatever's going on, events. But I'm happy to take any questions if anyone wants to ask any. I don't know if we could do that or not, or however you want to do it.
Yes, yeah, Becky, let me see if there are any questions. There is.
I have a question. Will you be writing another book about Boston, given its
that's a good question. I don't know as much about Boston. Yeah, I know a lot happened there too, absolutely. So this was a labor of love really for Chef Walter Stabe, as I mentioned. He really wanted this written, and so yeah, I was thrilled to do it. So yeah.
Any other questions? Becky, thank you for a fascinating presentation.
Sure.
I had no idea of the importance of City Tavern or how prominent it was throughout the entire revolution and afterwards. Thank you for sharing your expertise, your history of food, and a wonderful presentation. Please help me count it.